The truck was parked. It was unmarked. No one was in uniforms. They did not identify themselves. That was it. They had said that in their briefings the very next day. They were parked here. They intentionally had a vehicle with an incredibly loud stereo system, and they made a lot of noise themselves, hooting and hollering. Bill came down and told them, this is based on the law enforcement people that told me this, that were involved that night. Bill told them if they didn't leave, he was calling the police, and they shunned him on. So he then turned around to go back to his home up there and call the police. Now, at that point, they were here, and he just basically turned right there, just out on this lot a little bit, and went on back. Right here out of this juniper was a spot I was told by law enforcement officials that the first deputy came out right at Bill's truck, because he was cruising along slow, watching them more than likely in his rearview mirror, me knowing him very well, to make sure they didn't follow him back over there. He came out, and this is the point where Bill knocked him off, surely with his arm, not ran over anything. That guy basically just landed on his butt because Bill hit the gas. So he made this little curve here, and this is where he stopped. At this point, according to law enforcement officials, from their briefing, and then plus people on site right then, when he stopped, one more person approached the vehicle, but not running. And that's when he did the open hands thing and a sign of, like surrender or whatever. Here's where he hit up on the bank, just trying to avoid the vehicle that then came shooting up here, full bore, full speed, came ripping up the hill. So obviously the people at the end had communications with people down there on the road. Must have verified that Bill had turned around coming back to his house. So they came zooming up here in a vehicle. He's avoiding them. He comes up on this bank. It was testified as that by the law enforcement reports, as well as the evidence on his vehicle that is what happened. The exhaust system was tore off the bottom. He then proceeded right there past the small elms and the driveway to the front of his yard. I was told by the law enforcement officials that were on site and ones that had to come up afterwards and get a briefing so they knew what went on roughly, because public was obviously going to be coming to try to come up here, and news crews and all whatnot. They had put out that Bill is not to be let back in that house alive. It was premeditated. It was put out, Bill will not be allowed back in alive.
I've drawn my line in the sand, and I'm going to do what's right by God, and I don't give a damn who cares or who likes it or who doesn't, even if it means I have to die on my doorstep.
What I'm going to talk to you about today comes from my heart, from my experience in life, from playing this role as messenger, which I take very seriously, from my efforts to wake up the American people, from my family, from all the letters that I get, from people that I talk to, just like I've talked to many of you here today. I've learned some things, and I think these things need to be passed on to you. And I think you need to start examining yourself, your agenda, your mission. Who are you? What are you about? What do you believe about America? Is it true? Are you helping to divide us more? Or are you helping to bring us together? Do you really understand what this country is all about?
If you listened to shortwave radio throughout the 1990s, you were bound to invariably come across the sound of a captivating voice in the wilderness. That authoritative and self-assured voice for 5 nights a week would educate us, enlighten us, and most importantly, warn us of things to come.
So they disguised their true intent and their true teachings, the esoteric, with a system of exoteric descriptions. That to the profane would mean one thing, and to the initiate or the adept would mean quite another. But that was then. This is now. What sort of creature inhabits the modern domain? Who is the modern man?
That voice spoke to us of matters esoteric and exoteric, political and supernatural, scientific and lawful. That voice was world-renowned author, radio show host, and ex-Naval Intelligence Officer Milton William Cooper, otherwise known as Bill Cooper.
I was reared in a military family. My father's an Air Force colonel. He's retired now. He was a command pilot. And I traveled all over the world, lived on military bases for most of my life. I was really an indoctrinated individual, you might say. I was as establishment as you could get, as gung-ho, pro-government, pro-America, pro-military. And that's why I went into the military, because that had been so much of my life. I went into the Air Force. I was in the Strategic Air Command for 4 years as an aircraft and missile hydraulic technician.
Bill left the Air Force in 1965 to join the United States Navy. Cooper was a member of the Office of Naval Security and Intelligence, serving as a harbor and river patrol boat captain at Da Nang and the Dong Ha River Security Group, Qua Viet, Republic of Vietnam. William Cooper was awarded several medals for his leadership and heroism during combat, including 2 with V for valor. He served on the intelligence briefing team for the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. It was during this time Bill would witness something that would forever change his life.
While we were on a transit from the Portland-Seattle area on the surface, I actually saw, I was the port lookout, and I saw the most incredible thing that I think I've ever seen in my life. And it had such a profound effect upon my view of the universe and the world that we live in, that I wish everybody could experience this. I saw come up out of the ocean, from beneath the surface of the sea, a huge disc-shaped craft about the size of a Midway-class aircraft carrier, which is tremendous in size. Came up out of the ocean and rose into the air and tumbled on its axis and went up into the clouds, and I was awestruck, dumbstruck. And I mean dumbstruck, literally. I could not utter a sound. And my first impulse was to tell the officer of the deck that I'd seen a flying saucer, and then luckily for me, I couldn't talk. So I told the officer of the deck that I'd seen something about 15 degrees off the port bow at a relative distance of about 2.5 nautical miles. And he began to look in that area. And the starboard lookout had heard me tell him this, and he began to look over there. And it did something that, as far as I knew, was absolutely impossible. I'd been in the Air Force. I'd worked on the state-of-the-art of our aviation capabilities. And here I was on the deck of a submarine in the conning tower, and I knew what we had to be able to have to go underwater, and I knew that the two were incompatible. Here's something that came from under the water and flew in the air and performed maneuvers, and then came back down and interfaced with the water at tremendous speed and remained intact, which realistically, it never touched the water. The water sort of magically opened up in front of it, but something had to interface with that water. Anything that we had that interfaced with the water in that manner would have been disintegrated. It's like hitting a brick wall. So I was looking at a technology that, as far as our laws of physics and what we knew at that time, didn't exist. This was in 1966. But when we reached Pearl Harbor, we were not allowed to go ashore to go on liberty. even though we didn't have the duty. And about 2 hours after we berthed at the submarine base, a commander from the Office of Naval Intelligence came on board and debriefed each one of us individually in the captain's stateroom. And the ultimate outcome of the debriefing was that we didn't see anything, we didn't hear anything, and we had to read rules and regulations that told us that if we ever talked about what it was that we didn't see, that we could be imprisoned, we could be fined $10,000, we could lose all pay and allowances due or ever to become due. And I learned at that moment that the United States Navy didn't want anybody to know about what we saw, and that severe consequences could come down around the neck of anybody who did.
This one event had started Bill on what would become a lifelong quest that would lead him into investigative territories such as extraterrestrial life, high-level government cover-ups, and the role secret societies play in all these scenarios. Bill had begun to publicly discuss his findings only to lose his leg after being forced off the road by people who would later visit him in the hospital, telling him to keep quiet. Bill went public once again, but made sure this time he was protected.
Originally back, I guess when Bill was first starting to release all of this material, he had released a document called The Secret Government, subtitled The Origin, Identity, and Purpose of MJ-12. And Bill had spent a considerable amount of his fortune at that time, well, there was any fortune, but a considerable amount of his money, into the tens of thousands of dollars, to get this document released and disseminated across North America and the world. So he had mailed it to all sorts of congressmen, key political figures, as well as some friends and family and things like that, just so people would have this document in their hands.
And that's how I protected myself, or at least that's what I thought would protect me, and so far it's proven to be right, was that if I got literally in front of the public overnight, in front of a large public, that they wouldn't do anything to me because it would substantiate what it was that I'm saying. And they certainly don't want to do that. It would also create a martyr. And martyrs create tremendously dangerous political movements that they don't want that either. Mm-hmm. So literally within a 24-hour period, I spent $27,000 mailing a thick packet of information all over the world to people I'd never heard of, didn't know. We went down and got some mailing lists and just mailed this stuff all over the world. And I've been in front of the public ever since. So I think basically those are the reasons. They don't believe that the public's really going to listen to me, and so far that's been true. There is a small group of people all over the world who are awakening, who are beginning to understand that they've been living their life in fantasy land, and who are actively seeking the truth. But by and large, when the secret power structure says, as I've put in the first chapter of my book, right out of one of their own technical manuals, that a nation or world of people who do not use their intelligence are no better than animals who do not have intelligence, and thus are stakes on the table by choice and consent, they're absolutely right about the majority of people.
Bill was frightened for his life back in those days, and he needed some way to get the information out to a large number of people. And keep in mind, this was in the days long before the internet, so there was no real practical, very easy way for people to do this kind of disseminating their information or documents that they had. It was very difficult back in those days, and the only way would have been through probably the printed word would have been the easiest way. So that's what Bill had done. He had made many copies of this secret government.
The secret government was an amalgamation of Bill's continued research into UFO phenomena and was first introduced at the MUFON Symposium on July 2nd, 1989 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The document highlighted his research into the UFO crash in the late 40s in Roswell, New Mexico, and documents that alluded to President Truman's knowledge of extraterrestrial life and his administration's efforts to keep it quiet. Cooper had seen these documents while serving in naval intelligence.
Years ago, many years ago, in fact, 1972, I was sitting at my desk at about 4:30 in the morning at the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet, arranging the information that had come in over the last 24 hours into a logical order so that we could prepare a briefing for the Admiral and his staff, which would take place later that morning. Among the papers I found on my desk was a document entitled Operation Majority, and it was not the entire paperwork involving this operation, but was merely a synopsis of the operation and projects contained under it. One of these projects was called Project Red Light. The purpose, according to this document, was to back-engineer captured extraterrestrial technology for adaptation into the United States space program. Now, I have since come to believe that the extraterrestrial portion of all of this is nonsense, but that the technology is real. I believe that many of us were shown these documents over the years so that later we would talk about it. I mean, how can you keep the existence of extraterrestrials, if they were real, a secret? And how could anyone keep quiet knowing that they had seen documentation, official government documents labeled top secret, that expressed that these extraterrestrials were real and had visited this Earth? I wanted to know just how true all of this was, and I began a program of research to find out if extraterrestrials were real. The first thing I did was collect every bit of documentation that I could find, both from the Freedom of Information Act, from the research of others, from books that had been printed on the subject of UFOs, and of course through my network of friends in the intelligence community. What I discovered was amazing. What I discovered, ladies and gentlemen, is that there has been a plan in existence since about 1917, and probably before that, to create an artificial extraterrestrial threat to this Earth in order to create a one-world totalitarian socialist government.
A UFO in China's skies forced Zhoushan Airport to stop operations on July 7th. Outbound flights were grounded after the unidentified flying object was detected by a flight crew. The incident has captured the attention of Chinese media, and theories about the UFO's identity are burning up on the internet as well. They include everything from a hidden U.S. bomber to an elaborate man-made hoax. For now, the UFO continues to be a mystery. A spokesman from China's Civil Aviation Administration confirmed to ABC News that the matter is under investigation.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
The reason for the denial was, number one, they didn't know if these were hostile and could we protect ourselves from them. Didn't want the Soviets to know, so they devised to lie about it and cover it up.
Decades ago, visitors from other planets warned us about where we were headed and offered to help. But instead, we, or at least some of us, interpreted their visits as a threat and decided to shoot first and ask questions after.
This is KUTV News, Channel 2, Salt Lake City, Utah.
3 arson fires in less than 24 hours at a Salt Lake City nursing home. A suspect is in custody. Officers and families gather to honor deputies killed in the line of duty.
And a new twist to an old story. Is it possible the CIA was involved in the death of President John F. Kennedy? We'll show you the pictures and let you decide. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Harlow.
And I'm Bob Evans. This is KUTV News at noon. John F. Kennedy assassination, UFOs, the New World Order, and the secret government. Those are just some of the areas today's guest says he has incredible information about. In the early 1970s, Bill Cooper was a Naval Security Intelligence officer. He says he was privy to secret documents that gave almost inconceivable explanations to some of the things I just mentioned. Bill Cooper, thanks for being with us today. Let's talk about the JFK assassination. CIA plot?
Well, from the top secret documents that I read while I was in Naval Intelligence, it concerned the Central Intelligence Agency, the Secret Service, Division 5 of the FBI, and the Office of Naval Intelligence, and that's why I was able to view these documents.
Now, why would the CIA and the security community want to kill the president?
From what I understand and from what I read, Bob, they viewed President Kennedy as a security threat, and I'm not sure exactly what that means. But the documentation clearly said that the assassin was the driver in the car in which he was riding in Dallas on that day, and it was plainly visible in a film withheld from the public.
Now, you brought that film with you. Let's take a look at that if we can. Here's the film. Go ahead and narrate this for us, will you?
Well, it took me 16 years to find this film because it has really been withheld. And what you're seeing here is the motorcade on Elm Street passing in front of the book depository building. Kennedy has been shot in the throat, and Jacqueline is pulling him toward her, trying to comfort him, and she's in shock. At this time, you see the driver turn around with a pistol in his left hand, firing over his right shoulder, and shoots the president directly in the head.
Here's a repeat of it, yeah.
The weapon, watch the driver, his name is William Greer. He was, in fact, a Secret Service agent. The weapon is an electrically operated, gas-powered assassination pistol built especially for the Central Intelligence Agency.
You don't see any puff of smoke from...
That's correct. Because
what you think is a pistol there in the right-hand corner, lower right-hand corner.
That's correct.
Why is that?
Well, it's an air-operated pistol. It's pneumatic. And it actually fired an exploding pellet which injected shellfish toxin into the president's brain so that if the actual explosion of the pellet itself did not kill him, the toxin would.
Now, did you read all of this in the documents?
Yes, and that's why his brain was switched for another brain in transit between Parkland Hospital in Dallas and Bethesda Naval Hospital in Washington, D.C.
Now, what about Oswald?
Oswald was a patsy. We have a photograph of him actually standing in front of the book depository building in the doorway watching the motorcade as it goes by. That is Lee Harvey Oswald there. You can look at his clothing, and you can see in a following picture, I don't know if they're going to show it here, but we also have photographs of him when he was under arrest.
Yeah, we don't have that, but I have seen that photograph, and they do look quite similar. The clothing is very similar.
Absolutely. We've also done body measurement proportion comparison analysis between the two photographs, and there's no doubt it's Lee Harvey Oswald.
This is incredible. Why isn't it that the CIA has silenced you? Why haven't they silenced you?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think they want a martyr on their hands. Martyrs create political movements. And what I did is literally within a 24-hour period, I prepared a $27,000 mailing. That's what it cost me personally to mail this information all over the world and the United States. And so they're faced with a dilemma. Do they allow me to speak and allow people to doubt what I'm saying, or do they do something overt toward me to silence me and thus verify that everything that I have said is true?
Now, what about Jackie Kennedy? She was in the car with the president right there, and we saw her later in that film trying to get out of the car. Yeah. Why hasn't she said something?
Well, it's obvious. You have to understand that the Secret Service was a participant in the plot to assassinate the president. She saw William Greer shoot her husband. She tried to get out of the car because she had every reason to believe that she might be left. She saw Connolly hit. She saw her husband hit. She tried to exit. Her own personal bodyguard, Clint Hill, tried to put her back in the car and succeeded. But you have to understand that her children, for the rest of their life, are guarded by the Secret Service. She is also under protection of the Secret Service. A better thing might be, say, captive, you might say.
You have a seminar coming up on
Saturday at Taylorsville High School Auditorium. All the tickets are available at all SmithTix locations.
But you'll talk about this, and you'll talk about a bunch of other things.
Many other things. Saturday, 11 a.m.
All right. Bill Cooper, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
When we come back, we will continue our look at multiple personality disorder when the News at Noon continues.
Can you believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. This is a CNN reporter with a camera crew. And he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth. And whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it. When in hell are all you people going to wake up?
An examination of the building's steel beams and columns could have shown whether explosives had been used to slice them, but virtually all of the steel was removed before it could be properly investigated, then put on ships to Asia to be melted down.
It's important for us to not reveal how we collect information. That's what the enemy wants.
And you have no evidence that the government's behind 9/11, and I frankly think it's an awful thing to allege, considering it's not true, and you haven't proved that it is. It's totally implausible. Like, we would report that if that were true.
Because these guys own our government. They print our money, and they own not only the government, but they own you. You are their property. So, in other words, these guys print the money, they run the country, and they own you, and they own everything around it. And so they make the laws, and that's why they can decide who can kill who, and who can get away with who, and who can get away with whatever, because they make the laws and they decide, all right?
We'll get into what's been going on there in Arizona a little bit later. I really appreciate you taking out the time to do this program with your busy schedule. Where do you think things are going to be in the next 2 years?
Well, either Americans are going to wake up and they're going to stand up in unison and take up arms and challenge the federal government to step back within the boundaries of the Constitution, or there's going to be a civil war in this country. The only alternative to that is total enslavement of the entire human race on a global scale, because that's where this is going. This is all about a one-world, totalitarian, socialist government. It's about destroying all existing nation states, destroying all existing religions, save the religion of those who are bringing this about, which is the secular, humanist, socialist religion.
That way you can devalue human life and kill people.
Well, but they're already doing that.
Yes, they are.
And they've already convinced the American people that it's okay. The people whose ancestors came to the New World to escape religious persecution in the Old World stood and watched the Branch Davidians burn, including all of their children, all of their women, and they cheered and said that it was because they were a bunch of religious fanatics. I heard Christians say that. I heard Orthodox Jews say that. I heard Baptists say it. I heard Catholics say it. And to their shame, I have to tell them that they are not religious, moral people. They are stupid, ignorant sheeple who are on the verge of enslavement, and they're going to deserve exactly what they get. I have no sympathy for them whatsoever anymore. I used to cry big alligator tears for them in their ignorance, and I used to do everything I could to wake them up. I've drawn my line in the sand, and I'm going to do what's right by God, and I don't give a damn who cares or who likes it or who doesn't, even if it means I have to die on my doorstep.
I want to tell you how good or bad it's getting, depending upon how you look at it. If you look at it in a manner that we want socialists to wake up, that we want the stupid sheeple to wake up, it's good. If we're looking at it in a manner that we want to save the nation, it's bad. Because even the socialists, the hardcore so-called liberal Democrats, they're not liberal at all, people who support the Constitution, people who understand the principles and ideals of the Founding Fathers, are the greatest liberalists on the face of this earth, because freedom is the most liberal idea that's ever existed in the history of the world. I mean freedom for the common man. Let me tell you what's happening. I went surfing today. Yes, I did. I got on my little mouse board and went surfing today. All across the internet. I did searches for words like Karl Marx, Marxist, liberal, liberalism, Lucis Trust, Lucifer. All of the things that will lead me to pages that traditionally support the Clintonistas, Al Gore, the Democratic Party, all of those things. What I found was amazing. What I found is even New Agers. Well, for instance, on several New Age websites, which are traditionally staunch supporters of the Democrat Party, of Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, all of the Marxist communists that have, been in office for this last regime. They had a picture of Al Gore and a picture of George Bush, and the refrain was never the same, and the pictures were not the same. But it always went something like this. Choice? I don't think so. Vote for Ralph Nader. Now, this is strong stuff coming from traditional Democrats, Marxist socialists, people who support the New World Order, people who want to see the United Nations climb to the summit of the mountain in the north and sit on the throne of the world. This is strong stuff coming from them. Remember I told you the pendulum is swinging? It's swinging with a vengeance. Al Gore doesn't have a prayer in hell. And I'm telling you right now, the only reason George Bush is going to get elected is because there is no other viable candidate. There isn't any. And they can't rig an election where so many people are going to vote against somebody.
They made it so impossible for another Abraham Lincoln to get elected to the office of president that it's a wonder that we even have a chance at all. We need to send people to Congress and to government who are going to clean house. Kick all the members of secret societies out of the bureaucracy. Lock them up. Try them for treason. Because they are traitors.
So one thing that may help is term limitations.
We must have term limitations, and it must be only one term. And forget all this nonsense that anybody who goes to Washington don't know what's happening. They don't know what's happening simply because they haven't taken the time as citizens to understand how our government works before they ever go to Washington. You see, it should be a process that starts in infancy and works its way up, and everybody should be taking part in the government.
Now, if someone came in to office with this kind of knowledge and with this kind of intent to really push these people out, would they not be eliminated immediately?
Not if they have the people behind them, because what the people would do in one fell swoop, in one election, would elect people who've never served in government before, kick the incumbents out, send citizens to Washington.
You're saying is we're heading toward a socialist approach based on this scenario.
You have to understand the difference between capitalism, socialism, communism, what all of these things really mean. You have to understand what the difference is between right wing and left wing. People, they use these phrases all the time, and they don't even know what these things mean. And it's just incredible to me to hear a socialist calling someone else a Nazi. Because Nazi means National Socialism. So here's a socialist calling a right-wing guy a Nazi, when what he should be calling the right-wing guy is anarchist. People on the right want no control. Mm-hmm. They're really anarchists. Okay?
So they would, in theory then, or in fact, be in opposition to this ultimate movement.
Yes.
Whereas in appearance, they would be the ones behind it.
Well, when you have a misunderstanding of what the terms mean, yes.
Okay.
Right wing, on the far right, is total anarchy. They don't want anybody controlling anything that they do, and they believe that people are responsible enough that the world can exist without government.
Okay.
Or the very minimal government that it would take to. On the far left, on the other hand, they believe that the government should be in total control and should be supply man with all of his needs.
Well, creating a whole society that's dependent.
Right. A republic is somewhere in the middle. It's governance by laws. Laws are decided by representatives who are elected by the people. And according to the theory, the representatives will do what is right, whether they get elected or not, because it's not really a democracy. A democracy is far left. People don't understand. We don't live in a democracy. This country is not a democracy. It is a republic. A democracy is ruled by the mob. The mob always votes themselves every kind of benefit that they can vote themselves. And whenever you do that, it means large, tremendously overpowering government in control.
They vote themselves into dependency.
That's it. They
Okay.
vote themselves into a dictatorship is what they do, where they lose all of the benefits that they intended to vote themselves into in the first place.
Okay.
And democracies are extremely dangerous to minorities, because if the majority of people don't like you,
right,
they're going to vote that they kill you, and they can, that's it. Democracies are dangerous. Democracies are socialists. Democracies are communism. That's what communism is. The definition of communism is everybody doing according to their talents and receiving according to their need. And it doesn't work. We already know it doesn't work. Man, by his inherent nature, is greedy. So those at the top always end up having everything, and those at the bottom end up having nothing in communism. Socialism is different. Socialism usually ends up in a dictatorship, in a very controlling dictatorial government which even owns the people that it governs, so that those who live in fear of not having are provided for what they need, and in turn they worship this oppressive government. Socialists are children who went out into the world, took a look around and said, I can't handle it, and went home to Daddy.
Okay.
Daddy, protect me. Daddy, feed me. Daddy, loan me your car. Daddy, tuck me in at night. Socialists are scared little children who are irresponsible, can't stand on their own 2 feet, and need Daddy to take care of them.
Okay.
Okay?
Now we got the...
But what happens when you go home to Daddy and Daddy does all these things for you? Tell me.
Well, you never leave the home. You've got no reason to. In other words, if you're being provided for in that way.
You're being provided for, but what does it mean? Doesn't it mean that you have to do what Daddy tells you to do?
True.
Doesn't it mean you have to be in when Daddy tells you to be in? Doesn't it mean that you can't drive the car to the next town if Daddy tells you you can't? Doesn't it mean that if Daddy tells you to take out the trash, you better take out the trash? Are you beginning to understand the concept? When you ask for favors from Daddy, you have to give up freedom in return.
Right. Okay.
So socialism always leads to repression of liberty, freedom, equality. All of those things fly out the window so that you can have free health care, so that you can have a place to live but you don't have to pay the rent, so that you can have food given to you by the state. And that's where we're headed. Right in this country right now, we're almost totally socialist, and now people are screaming for a national health care policy.
Right.
Health care insurance.
Now, the other aspect, once again, I'd like to go into is the anarchy or the right wing, which we just into that similar.
Anarchists believe that they can be responsible, that they won't hurt other people,
Okay.
that your freedom never ends until it begins to infringe upon someone else's freedom, and that no one should have any control over that there should be no speed limits on the highways. The problem is that, again, just like on the socialist side, you have people over here that are human, and human condition means that ultimately somebody's not going to be responsible, that they're going to drive too fast when they've had too much to drink, and they're going to kill innocent people. The answer is a balance. You know, the law of the universe says this. It's a law of physics, really, and everybody can understand it. For every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction. There can be no good unless there is evil. There can be no man without a woman. You understand the concept?
Based on that, the theory of a utopia here on Earth is corrupt right away.
Absolutely.
It goes against the laws of physics.
It goes against the law of the universe that there must be two opposing forces all the time in every instance, because that's what makes the universe work. That's what makes everything work. What we need to do is stop trying to go way over here and establish some utopia of freedoms, or way over here to establish some repression of freedom so that we make sure that we got something on the table to eat. And strike a balance between the two that works. And stop withholding information. What makes it difficult for anyone to succeed or live, or for us to really come together and have peace in this world, are all of these people who think that they are the guardians of the secrets of the ages and have only them have truly mature minds, so only them are worthy of knowing the secrets and the real science and the real metaphysics and all of these things. So they repress it and they keep it secret. So the rest of us live out our lives and we don't know the truth of what life is really all about. Therefore, we're always stumbling over each other and getting in each other's way and doing the things that we profess that we don't want to do, simply because we don't have access to the truth. If we had access to the truth... Now, I got to tell you this. Back when these men first began establishing these societies, these mystery schools, and suppressing information, the common man was uneducated, did not have an intellect capable of understanding these secrets. They were really beasts of burden, for the most part, and they lived their whole life in toil.
Right.
But things are not that way now. Most people have a good education. They have a good mind. They're capable of understanding if they're taught, and if they're taught correctly. And I think it's time to teach people what the truth is, and quit hiding it, so that we can come together as one humanity and make a balance and live together in a balance. You know, evil's never going to disappear. Neither is good. But we can maintain a balance and life can be good. Instead of swinging back in this tremendous battle between these two opposing, radical, extreme ends of the scale. That's got to stop. I've never understood why somebody would join together in this band of people and call himself a Democrat and not vote for anybody else if they're not a Democrat. That concept is beyond my understanding. And Republicans and Libertarians and Populists and Communists and Socialists and this and that, and blacks and whites and Indians and there are so many sects and groups and segments, and we're so fragmented that getting together is going to really be difficult. But we've got to do it. Because if we don't wake up and do it ourselves, these men who meet in secret and plot the manipulations are going to do it whether we want it or not, and they're going to do it at the point of a gun. And they're going to take away everybody's freedom because they don't consider us responsible.
Capable of having that freedom.
Are capable, or even of using our intellect. So they'll put us in shackles and control us and force us to be peaceful. That's what the plan is, and that's what the New World Order is all about.
So Bill Cooper was hot and heavy on continuing to educate the public on the truth. And then shortly thereafter, some things changed with respect to how they were coming at Bill Cooper. What happened that led up to his, I'm calling it his assassination at this point? It was his murder. What turn? Was there any turn of events that took place, or was it just a sudden, that's it just happened?
No, I will say, well, it's a little of both. It's such a screwed up situation. But to give you an idea, originally, you can see in the state reports that were done by the Department of Public Safety, your highway patrol, okay, in other words. They're typically called in on homicides. Not typically, always. Here's the theory. They're not a local police. They're not a local sheriff. They don't, live down the road type of thing.
Right.
So you get a more unbiased reporting. It came out in those 300-plus pages of initial reports from the state of Arizona following, because it was deemed a homicide on the death certificate even, of Bill's, that the initial raid was planned for 9/11.
Was it really?
On page 3. And we did tons of broadcasts on that very subject. The initial raid was on 9/11. That was the planned date. And due to security concerns, and I'm saying their words, okay? Due to security concerns and heightened activity of that day, the 9/11 raid on Bill was called off. And the biggest part of that is the fact that we were live for 10 hours straight. How are you going to run into a studio? I'm talking drive up, do yards, do massive troops, not troops, but you know what I mean.
Right.
And do all that if someone's live and do it without it being live.
Right.
They're Waco or Ruby Ridge, that they, because of PR, quite honestly, they were trying to avoid that type of situation again with anybody, not just him. They want to do it more subtly behind the scenes.
What was the justification for the raid? What was the? They had warrants. Obviously, they were going after him on what grounds?
Well, there's multiple sets of warrants, if you will. Many of them have been called off even as time went by. Everything from assaulting some citizens locally to threats and intimidation to the whole federal marshal thing, wanted list that had started on us back in 1998, because of that jurisdictional piece we wrote and had delivered to every member of Congress and Clinton and Janet Reno and all of them, certified mail return receipt. And we all signed it and had that delivered. That was one big amplitude. That's 1998.
Right.
And then as it got closer, there was an amassing of all these other figures. There was court orders for supposed back alimony from a former wife from 20 years ago that had been upgraded to felonies. I mean, it's unbelievable when you read all the reports how much was amassed that summer to try to tie in this and create this story, if you will, this picture of this crazy psycho that's got this whole trail of outstanding warrants behind him. The mechanizations were powerful, and they had unlimited time and resources. But the main push pulse was some supposed threats and intimidations with, even indicating like death that Bill had supposedly made, including following a family clear to their driveway in town. That was supposedly the main stimulus at that point.
And this is all false information?
Much of it, yes.
Much of it, okay. So basically it was you and I know, and everybody should know, that it was in direct retaliation for him wanting to expose the truth about a lot of things. He basically was being retaliated against. They were coming up with all kinds of things that they could justify a raid on. So they wanted to do it on 9/11. They had to hold off on that. And then November 5th came.
Right here at Bill's home is where he pulled up. His front of this vehicle would be towards me. The other vehicle was parked with the front towards the other end of the street. Bill ran around the back of his vehicle, which would be towards the driveway. He then proceeded across his yard. This is when the shooting began, according to their reports. The vehicle that was parked here besides his truck, which was pointed that way, he had bought for Jessica, his daughter, and then she didn't want it, so it was just sitting here. Sheriff Goldsmith ran around the back of it, which would be towards me, and got on this street side to use the vehicle as protection. At that point, Bill is approximately halfway in the yard and still running with his back towards him. They claim at that point he began shooting, which was with his right arm just thrown backward, haphazardly pulling the trigger of a .38 snub-nose Smith & Wesson. From where we're standing would be essentially the angle that Goldsmith would have been standing, but closer. Marina's would have been by the 58 Chevy, which would be equivalent to that truck, but up all the way to the wall. Next to that end post of the front porch. Bill was supposedly shooting backwards like this, which would be back towards the street in reality, that direction. When he hit Marina's, that angle does not work at all. Plus, the bullet hole in the glass of the 58 Chevy indicates a bullet path of approximately this direction through the driver's roll-down window and out the passenger corner of the windshield, indicating clearly it went towards the dome in town, which is the high school field for playing during the winter. At that point, Goldsmith opened fire, hitting Bill several times. Bill fell down right where the porch would start, and the dirt would meet the concrete sidewalk. Next to the planter, you can just slightly see raised on this side favoring me from the front door. That's where he fell. And according to them, they quit shooting, and he was dead.
A Patriot County Sheriff's deputy is in the hospital after being shot in the head by a so-called militia member.
Now, what we know is that militia member is dead. Our Gary Harper has the very latest on what's going on with that story. Gary?
Marty Scott, this all happened in a little town called Eager, Arizona, which is just on the eastern side of the state of Arizona. It's almost on the border of New Mexico. This is what we know so far. Sheriff's deputies, we understand, were trying to serve some type of arrest warrant on a man by the name of William Cooper. He's also known as Bill Cooper. He reportedly has been known to be hostile toward law enforcement, so sheriff's deputies apparently disguised themselves as a bunch of rowdy teenagers in the back of a pickup truck in hopes of luring Cooper out, and it apparently worked. However, when Cooper realized what was happening, he reportedly pulled a gun and shot a 40-year-old deputy in the head. During the gunfight, Cooper himself was shot and he was killed. Now, this is what we know about Bill Cooper. Officials say he belongs to some kind of militia movement and has published several anti-establishment articles. He has a website, we understand, and on that website he acknowledges that there is an arrest warrant for him, but he writes, and we're quoting here, any attempt by any federal government agent or anyone else to execute the unlawful arrest warrants will be met with armed resistance. Any person who attempts to kidnap our children will be shot upon discovery, and that is apparently what happened earlier this morning. Sometime after midnight, Cooper reportedly pulling a gun and shooting a 40-year-old Apache County Sheriff's deputy in the head. That sheriff's deputy, we understand, has been flown to Phoenix, where he is in a hospital. We are trying to get his condition right now. We do not know exactly what his condition is, and we understand that the militia member, in this case Bill Cooper, was shot to death. We do have a crew en route to Eager, Arizona, and we'll have a lot more coming up on tonight's news.
Eventually, Bill did get hit, and we did a whole autopsy audio, as I'm sure you're aware of, because it got kind of famous, with a bona fide autopsy expert.
Mm-hmm.
And there was stippling evidence. Now, stippling only occurs from those unburned or still burning flakes of powder coming out of the end of any muzzle.
Right.
And it can only appear within 16 inches of the target. So when they got him down, then there was multiple close-range shots right at the body because there was those little unburned powder flakes causing that stippling on his skin.
At point blank.
Basically, yeah, that is considered point blank when you have stippling.
Right.
And because of the angles of them, and you can track the course of events in a good autopsy, and we were able to do that on our famous broadcast about this. He already had a fatal catastrophic wound, and multiple shots occurred even at point blank by legal definition after the catastrophic, you ain't moving nowhere. You're not twitching, you're not responding, you're down and out.
Right.
And that was right shy of the 4-foot concrete walkway to the front door.
Mm-hmm.
Head was laying just inches away from the rock border. And when Eager Police was finally called 2 hours later, that, oh, you've got a resident dead, by the way, in your town, in the report showed that in case of any fatalities, the attackers had even prearranged with the ambulance services that if they were to come through town, not to run sirens. You know, that way people aren't getting woke up.
Right.
And when the next thing I know, there's flashing lights coming into my home down the way.
Right.
Sorry to always talk like a redneck, but...
No, that's okay. Everybody
so
should.
That was instant alarm, what's going on. And it was one of the local police that I knew. I mean, I knew them all. I know them all still.
Right.
And he was walking up to the door. Well, I knew something was wrong, obviously. And those lights were barricades that were getting put up at the end of the road by one of those agencies that was involved to block off my road. And he was approaching, telling them, what, are you guys dumbasses or what? That's basically was the sum of it out the end of the street. And came up to my house and said, I came out and said, what are you doing? What's going on? Because you just know.
Right.
They don't just come to your home for the heck of it.
Yes, sir.
You know, and with lights and shit. So I said, what's going on, Frazier? And he says, let's sit down here on the porch. And I said, yeah, grab a seat. And he had his blue windbreaker that said police on. That's rare. That's little towns. And he says, Bill's been murdered. And I said, what? I mean, he was like, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean? And he said, and he gave me a brief rundown of this on the spot and said, now we're protecting you because they wanted to come after you, so we've got an officer assigned to you. And they did keep their word and did that. And he said, they told us in our briefing at 1 in the morning when the chief finally got the call and called me as the only detective on the force. It's just a shared duty reality on a small force. And we went up there. They said we did not want another Waco or Ruby Ridge, so we weren't going to allow him to get in the house alive.
I've drawn my line in the sand, and I'm going to do what's right by God, and I don't give a damn who cares or who likes it or who doesn't, even if it means I have to die on my doorstep.
I have the record and the reputation of being right. More than anyone else who has ever lived in the history of the world. And I don't do it because I'm a psychic. I don't do it because God talks to me. I don't do it because I have tarot cards, or I read your fortune, or I look at your palm, or read the bumps on your head. I do it because I study history. I research everything that happens. I have seen the same thing happen to people who have done these kinds of things throughout the history of the human race. Many of them are described in the Bible. Read it. You might learn something. You might also be deceived. If you want to be a Christian, read the words of Christ. Don't listen to your pastor, your preacher, your bishop, your church. Read the words of Christ and follow them. If you want to be a Muslim, read the writings of the Quran and follow them. If you want to be a Jew, read the book of the Torah and stop listening to the rabbis. Get my drift? If you want to be a follower of Buddha, follow the way of life that he taught. Do not try to make him a god.